Well, as we discussed earlier, Vice President J.D. Vance gave a fiery speech on Friday criticizing Europe and expressing his thoughts on what he thinks the continent's main problems are.
His speech has divided many, to say the least, in the political sphere. Here are some highlights.
The threat that I worry the most about vis-a-vis Europe is not Russia, it's not China, it's not any other external actor. And what I worry about is the threat from within, the retreat of Europe from some of its most fundamental values, values shared with the United States of America. In Washington, there is a new sheriff in town, and under Donald Trump's leadership, we may disagree with your views, but we will fight to defend your right to offer it in the public square, agree or disagree. I believe that dismissing people, dismissing their concerns, or worse yet, shutting down media, shutting down elections, or shutting people out of the political process protects nothing. No voter on this continent went to the ballot box to open the floodgates to millions of unvetted immigrants. And more all over Europe, they're voting for political leaders who promise to put an end to out-of-control migration. Now, I happen to agree with a lot of these concerns, but you don't have to agree with me. I just think that people care about their homes, they care about their dreams, they care about their safety and their capacity to provide for themselves and their children.
Former US Ambassador to Russia, Michael McFaul, responded to Vance, telling Politico, he thinks it is censorship, I think it's Russia, and many people here think it's Russia.
Tech lawyer Preston Byrne wrote on X, J.D. Vance's speech in Munich was excellent. Europe's elites are running their countries into the ground. Vance is simply communicating that those who oppose decline will have a friend in America going forward, and those who seek to silence that opposition will have an enemy.
Yale history professor and author Timothy Snyder wrote on Blue Sky, I'm in Munich and people keep asking me to decode Vance's speech. Okay, in Vance English, free speech means let Musk run your elections, and democracy means let Russia run your elections. Now, move on. 2025 is about what Europeans do, not what Americans say.
Legal analyst and Professor Jonathan Turley wrote on X, Vance's speech was truly Churchillian, no less than the famous Iron Curtain speech, daring the West to confront the dangers of communism. Roughly 80 years later, Vance called allies to account for the growing threat, not from foreign adversaries, but from themselves. So, a little bit more on free speech. Will not be surprising to you or the viewers that I am with J.D. Vance on most of this, in thinking that trying to suppress so-called dangerous political speech is not the way to go, and we don't approve of it. And I think European bureaucrats have done their countries a disservice by especially trying to manage social media companies in a way that limits speech and will make Europe ultimately not a good competitor in the tech market in the economic field. Now, I don't like to rank threats ever, so when you say that Russia and China are less of a threat than their own, there's no reason to, we can say this is bad, this is bad, this is bad. China is, to my mind, like the major global threat, so I actually don't want my leaders to downplay the threat of China. Now, I don't want to respond to that with warmongering or some kind of military buildup against China. I think we will beat China by being a better growing economy, and I would like Europe to join us, but they're too regulation prone to do that. So that would be my criticism. These things go hand in hand is what I'm saying.
Well, perhaps, but let me get to the reason why I think this has outraged so many people in Europe and, to be fair, American liberals. Part of it is because J.D. Vance is saying it, and he is portraying himself as this very muscular defender of free speech. You mentioned the problems of censorship. Self-censorship, of course, is also an issue. J.D. Vance at one point describing President Trump as an idiot and as reprehensible, and pondering whether he would have been America's Hitler. Once J.D. Vance got the whiff of personal advancement in his nostrils, several of those comments went by the wayside and were deleted, so that's self-censorship from him there. He also said, and I want to get this quote exactly right, about the Biden administration, that they seemed desperate to silence people for speaking their minds, so the Trump administration will do precisely the opposite. At a time when the Trump administration has fired inspectors general, when the prosecutor in the Eric Adams case spoke up, she was threatened with all sorts of investigation into her personal conduct. And when there are various other suggestions, for example, Trump has spoken frequently about investigating the tax affairs of his critics. And then Vance goes on to talk about how democracy rests on the sacred principle that the voice of the people matters, while during the campaign, dancing around the issue of who had won the 2020 election, when I would say the voice of the people very much mattered and was then President Trump tried to silence it by the events of that day. And then more laterally, Vance talked about, to Margaret Brennan actually, about the fact that, obviously we're not going to pardon people who committed violence on January the 6th. Matter of a couple of weeks later, those people are pardoned. And what does this staunch defender of democracy have to say? He said something to the effect of, well, we're not saying everyone did everything perfectly. This is what makes him such a ludicrous figure. It is this attempt to paint himself in this sort of macho way defending free speech, while he's just incredibly timid in his bending of the knee to Trump.
Well, I mean, there's plenty that the Trump administration has done and will do, or the Trump has done or will do, that I think runs contrary to free speech that I'm against. I was against the actions taken against the AP. I don't know that firing government employees is necessarily a free speech issue. I do think that, sure, plenty of what he does is contrary to the spirit of free speech, but I mean, Vance has. You're right. Vance has criticized. Vance likened Trump to Hitler, but he's speaking to Germany, a country that aspires to jail you or fine you or confiscate your devices for insulting politicians. That's what we talked about in my radar earlier today. Watch the radar if you haven't. I mean, these. I think. Look, are we imperfect messengers? Yes, government officials are always imperfect messengers because there's very few political leaders or government people who are good on free speech by the very natures of their jobs. But the messenger is imperfect, fine. But I agree with the message. The message is you people have embraced censorship. You're not listening to your own people. Your parties are losing. It is dooming the liberal project, the pro-democracy, pro-Western, pro-liberal project, that their governments are out of touch with what their voters want on immigration, and the censorship, I think, is one reason that they are, is that they don't want to listen to dissent on these topics.
But it's a different thing to say the messenger is imperfect from saying what is happening here, which is the messenger is acting in a way contrary to his own message when it comes to the current administration. You mentioned in passing there the ludicrous controversy around Gulf of America, Gulf of Mexico, which is getting the AP banned from various Trump events. That, in what way is that defending free speech? That is obviously punishing a media organization for, what's the phrase, viewpoint discrimination. That is obviously what is happening. So Vance is doing these things and then going over to Europe to lecture people on principles that he does not himself uphold.
That is bad, but Europe has gone so far beyond us. People should watch my radar. What the authorities in Germany purport to do to people who express dissenting views or false information or extremist views is crazy to me. It totally repulses me. And I don't like a lot of our political leaders either, and I think they're imperfect on free speech at best. I'm glad that Trump issued an executive order telling government officials no longer to interact with social media companies and tell them to take down content. I think that's a good thing. I think the AP thing is very bad. I think the Gulf of America thing is really silly and bad. And I'm going to criticize them when they do things I don't want, but part of the problem is that people who were supposedly on the other side, the defenders of liberal values, of democratic values, of norms of free speech, etc., don't have enough credibility on those issues because they've betrayed them in the eyes of the people of the world.
But why are you not so harsh on J.D. Vance's credibility then for all the things that I mentioned? You don't seem to have a problem with his credibility.
I mean, I didn't vote for him. I didn't support him. He was my least on the list of people Trump would pick to be VP. He was very, very last. I'm not particularly a fan of J.D. Vance, but he does well in media exchanges, and you set him up for utter success when the person on the other side of the argument is saying things. Not just Margaret Brennan, who said, that it was free speech is what caused Nazism, which even you think was historically not accurate. But then, Olaf Scholz responding to the J.D. Vance saying, we should be very clear that free speech in Europe means not attacking others in ways that are against legislation and laws we have in our own country. So they're agreeing with his criticism is valid, that they don't allow the kind of free speech we allow, and that's what they like and that's what they're happy with.
Well,
but Vance is not. But I'm not a pro-Vance person, and we should absolutely be more committed to free speech in this country by our government officials, and they should not fight pointlessly with media organizations over stupid trivialities like what we call the Gulf of Mexico. Very bad and very dumb. So.
Some common ground on the Gulf of Mexico.
Okay. Coming up, President Trump, another President Trump tweet sending shockwaves over the internet. We will discuss.